Hi, my name's TJ, and this is In My Own Words, helping you write your life story. Hello and welcome to this short course of 5 videos where we're going to help you with all elements of story writing and specifically focusing on life stories. Recently, I asked my dad to write his own life story, and that was because I became a father myself, and it encouraged me to reflect on family life, what's important, and what I was treasuring most and what I wanted to hold on to the most. In that moment of reflection, I realized that I'd never really known any of my grandparents properly, and I'd never known either of my grandfathers at all. And this encouraged me to sort of think about my relationship with my dad and my children's relationship in the future with my dad, their grandpa. And it made me feel quite passionate about wanting to preserve his legacy so that they could know him the way I've known him. Because I've reached a point in my life where I wish I'd known more about my grandparents. And of course, unfortunately, that time has gone. I'm now dependent on the recollections and retellings of stories from my parents pertaining to my grandparents. And of course, with that comes the bias of being their child. So I'll never get my grandparents' stories in their own words. I'll only ever get how my mum and dad remember it as being, which is obviously through the eyes of the child, even if it's as a young adult, you know, it's tempered by opinions and circumstances, you know, where they have a vested interest either way. And so you can't necessarily get to the purity of how the person felt, what moved them, why they made some of the decisions that they made in their life, what they really enjoyed. I think as parents, you know, we always keep our children at arm's length, and I think that's right to do so up until a point where perhaps you might feel more comfortable letting them in and letting them know a little bit about who you really are as a person, without divulging too much, obviously. And so, yeah, I wanted to ask my dad to go through this process so that we could have a lasting legacy forever. And initially he was extremely daunted by that prospect, but slowly we identified the barriers that he was experiencing, the insecurities, the anxieties. And one by one, we sort of ticked all these boxes where suddenly he actually felt comfortable being in front of the camera and going through a process prior to that where he was recollecting as much as possible, reminiscing and encouraging that memory recollection, so that he could tell his story. He has told me that he had a fantastic time doing it. He said that it was an amazing experience to go through, and it prompted a dialogue afterwards where we both sort of explored the idea that actually maybe this is something that a lot of people should partake in, and maybe I can help people along their way if you have ever considered writing your life story or a memoir, or even if it's just a specific element of your life. Maybe you'd like to talk about your working life, maybe you'd like to talk about your family life specifically, then hopefully this short course of videos will help you to structure that, formulate that, iron out a few kinks in the road, and also maybe you can learn from some of the things that we learned along the way, mistakes where we might have done something slightly differently, or things that we did particularly well first time round, and we can help you on your way. So in this first episode, it's basically an introduction. We're going to cover things like, why would somebody want to record a life story? We're going to talk about things that people might identify as being a reason not to tell their life story, and hopefully shine a light on how to minimize the negative impacts of some of those things. And also we're going to talk about where to start, because I think that's one of the biggest barriers to entry, when you sit down with that pen and that paper and you have a whole life to consider, a whole lifetime's worth of memories and events and relationships that you want to cover, and that can feel quite overwhelming. So we're going to touch on that. In future episodes, we're going to talk about things like the process, how to schedule your time, treating it as a project with stages and incremental moments of development and enlightenment and enjoyment, working towards that end goal. We're also going to talk a little bit about the filming side of things, because there's an awful lot of people out there who might think to themselves, well, I can put a pen to paper, but what I really want to do is share my story in front of a lens where people can not only enjoy what I have to say, but they can hear me say it, and they can see the enjoyment and the sparkle in my eyes when I recount these events. Obviously, the barrier there is that some people don't know how to create video content. They might not know how to edit it. They might not know how to light it. So we're going to touch on that as well. And we're also going to have lots of hints and tips along the way. It's very informal, as I'm sure you can already work out. This is relatively unscripted. It's very well thought through, but it is unscripted. So yeah, I'll basically be divulging as much information to you to help you in your process as possible. So I hope you enjoy. So let's start at the very beginning, as somebody once said, a very good place to start. And let's attempt to answer, or shed some light at least, on the biggest question of all, really, in this process that you're probably going to encounter, which is, why would somebody want to write their life story? Now, I believe that everybody should at least consider this process at some point in their life. I've been privileged enough to see firsthand the impact that this has had on mine and my dad's relationship, but also him as a person going through this process. Things that I could never have foreseen when I first suggested this idea to him. I thought I was just creating something clever, something special, that in 50 years' time, my grandkids would be able to look back on their great-grandpa and see who he was, listen to him speak, watch him recount tales of his childhood, his own parents, and shed light on a life that they will never lead, because times are moving so quickly, that things are changing so much that it's amazing to look back only 100 years ago and think, you know, what life must have been like to live in those days. I thought it was just a clever idea, like a time capsule. But actually the real-time impact that it's had for us as a family in lifetime has been extraordinary, completely unforeseen. I didn't imagine that this is what it would be at all. And so the benefits are many. A lot of people might have something happen to them in their life that prompts them to think about these sorts of things. I know for me it was becoming a dad. And it encourages you to think about the bigger things in life, the more important things in life. And that can be a catalyst for creating something really beautiful and a legacy piece. But above and beyond that, I think there are just some excellent reasons to go through with a process like this. And I'm going to structure them in a list for you. I'm going to bring some graphics on the screen. So here's my top reasons why I think everybody should go through this process. Self-reflection. So we're living in a time where we're encouraged to reflect on ourselves. We're encouraged to speak about how we feel. And that transition has happened quite quickly, and it's happened quite recently. And the evidence for the positive impact of that seems to be everywhere. Some people can't afford to go and speak to a counsellor, for example, about how they feel. And even in the instances where people can afford to go through that kind of process, invariably, the epiphanies and the light bulb moments, that happen tend to be prompted by the counsellor, but executed by the individual. And they tend to find these things out about themselves as they're speaking. And so they have these wonderful moments. And I think it's really important to explore who you have been in order to continue the journey of who you can be. And I just think that it's a wonderful journey to go on. And the best thing that can happen from something like that is that as a result, you grow as a person. And that brings me neatly on to the next reason. Personal growth. So with the self-reflection, you can obviously learn a lot about yourself in that process. And that brings tremendous power. And with great power comes great responsibility to be the best person that you can be. And I think that involves personal growth. And I think by highlighting things that have happened in your past, whether it be in your childhood, whether it be relationships with parents, it encourages that self-reflection, and it encourages us to be able to grow as people and identify things that actually maybe I could be doing this better, or maybe I could be doing that better, or maybe I don't want to repeat the same mistakes, or maybe the ways in which I feel I've been let down by the people that I'm closest to in my life, I don't want to repeat those problems with my nearest and dearest moving forward. And I think that pertains to your values and your beliefs. And I think it can be a real marker for change. And so, yeah, I think how that sort of self-reflection manifests as growth. I've seen it with my dad, and it's an extraordinary thing to witness. And I think everybody should consider it for that reason. Well-being. Well-being seems to be a bit of a buzzword at the moment. Seems to be everywhere, and with good reason. We're all fragile. We're living in difficult times. There's never been an easier time to be alive in terms of the infrastructure that we have around us. And yet there's never been a time really where people have been so unhappy. And I think that's most notable or most easily observed in the younger generations. I mean, you can see it and you sort of think, well, when I was 18, I was very happy, and it was a good time. There is, of course, an argument for saying we all look back fondly on times that were less stressful and we had less responsibility than we have now. So that's something to bear in mind, absolutely. But I think most people would agree that these are difficult times that we're living in, and well-being should be at the forefront of everybody's agenda when it comes to how they're living their life. The process that you go through when you write your life story is full of opportunities to release that dopamine, release that oxytocin, feel good about things for a second, live in that nostalgic moment. There's obviously the therapeutic elements of writing, which is wonderful. Putting pen to paper is an extremely therapeutic process, and an enjoyable one, especially if there's no metric for success of what you're trying to write. If you know that you're only trying to match your own levels of what you want to achieve, nobody's going to come and grade what you've written afterwards. And that's because you're only writing or you're only recording for your audience. And we're going to get onto that a little bit later. You're not writing for the masses. The editor of the Telegraph or some big newspaper is not going to come along and give you a D- for what you've written. And so you're only held to your own standards and your own account. So that's quite a liberating experience in the realm of writing, I think, that there's no real pressure that comes with that. You can just be yourself and write the way you would speak or deliver the information down the camera the way that you normally would. And I think that will be appreciated more by the people that you're showing it to, because it demonstrates your authenticity. I think it's also entirely possible that during this process, you might find closure on traumas that you might be speaking about in your film or in your writing about in your book. There's obviously going to be big moments in every person's life where they've been through something. You might choose not to talk about that because you might want a certain levity to your life story and you might want to focus on the positives, and I encourage that. But if you are somebody that wants to dig a little deeper into what's made you who you are and things that have potentially had a big negative impact on you in some way, to do a deep dive into that and to get some clarity could be extremely important for your well-being. The last thing that I want to say on well-being as well is that this process, I strongly encourage you to invite your family and friends to be part of this process. Why? Well, because firstly, they're going to remember things that you can't remember. They're going to be able to shed light on all manner of things and all memories and photographs and whatnot that you'd forgotten. And that can really flesh out the whole story. But secondly, it's about spending time with them. It's about talking to them, reminiscing, and having those lovely moments where you're sharing a memory, you're looking at a photo together, you're in close proximity to each other as well. You know, we spend so much time apart these days that actually to invite somebody, to have a reason, right? To invite somebody over to your house and share in a cup of tea and relive enjoyable memories is extremely important, I think, for all of our well-being, and that certainly happened for me and my dad. I'll talk more about this later on, I'm sure, but we had moments where we pulled the photo albums down from the loft, and it was wonderful, and the kind of conversations that spawned as a result of that were fantastic, and that will live with me for an awfully long time, and that's coming from the person who didn't even go through the process themselves. So yeah, well-being, it's a big deal. Gratitude. So I've alluded to the fact already that I think for a lot of people who are considering embarking on this journey, and it is a journey, by the way, it's not just a project, it's incredible. A lot of people embarking on this journey will be doing so because something has happened in their life that's made them really want to take stock. They feel like they're at a point in their life where they want to reflect, and they want to look back and see how much they've achieved. I think it's life is so precious and so fragile, and sometimes things can happen that make us go, I feel the need to celebrate every moment. That's exactly where this falls into, my thinking. Having watched my dad go through it, there was so much celebration of all the things that he's achieved in his life, all the relationships that he's had, what it's meant to him, and what he has meant to other people. You get to the end of that process and you just feel a tremendous amount of gratitude for all the people in your life, all the places you've been able to visit, all the things you've been able to own as well. And I think it's extremely it's an extremely rewarding process to get to the end of that and think, do you know what? My life has been amazing. Understanding. There are some people, I'm sure, for whom there are things in their life, there are relationships in their life, there are arguments perhaps that they've had in their life where there's still not quite the closure that they like. Things have been left unsaid, unspoken, or arguments have been left unresolved. It's entirely possible that you might want to consider going through a process like this in order to articulate how you really feel about what happened and be able to pass that information on to the person that you want to say it to in a manner where you are uninterrupted. You feel like you can talk at your own pace. You feel like you can articulate yourself properly without the nature of the emotion getting involved. And you can say things according to how you see it in your own words. I keep saying in your own words, but that's why we called it what we did. And I think for a lot of people, it could be that vehicle, because not only are you able to say everything that you want to say uninterrupted, but that person has the opportunity to watch it over and over again and actually genuinely understand the emotion behind what you're saying and the genuine intentions behind what you're saying. I think it's something that you got to be careful of because, for example, I had one person who approached me and said, I'm considering creating a film to be watched after I pass by my adopted child who doesn't know that they're adopted. And I can't tell them while I'm alive. But I'd like them to know because I think they deserve to know. To which I said, well, I'm not your guy because it's way too personal and it's way too intimate for me to be held accountable for how that person's going to feel after they see it. So I can't be involved in that process with you. But I do think that it's something that you should consider doing for yourself. Some people can't have those conversations face to face because it's too emotional and it's too difficult, and it ends up going down a route where it makes things worse. It could be that for you. Maybe you just want to help people understand why you've made some of the choices that you've made in your life. And by the way, I'm framing this in a very kind of like intense and like, like there's big drama. It could just be that you want people to understand a little bit more why you support the football team that you do. It could be that you want to help people understand why you're a little bit picky about the food that you eat, and they've always given you a bit of grief for it. So there's a spectrum, again, of helping people to understand a little bit more about you. But yeah, understanding is a great outcome, potentially, for documenting this. Legacy. Last but not least, it's legacy, isn't it? I mean, this kind of goes without saying. As a species, humans have always wanted to solidify their legacy. You go back to the ancient Egyptians, and the pharaohs, and they wanted to preserve themselves, literally, by mummifying themselves. They wrote things in hieroglyphics. They carved things into walls to say that they were here, and as a result, we know so much about them by visiting those sites and interpreting those symbols and that language, and we know so much about it. It's an amazing thing to do, and it's stood the test of time. You go back a few hundred years, and one of the most amazing and impressive things that anybody could do was have a portrait of themselves, by an artist. And you think, you see these sort of Tudor paintings and the like, where what an amazing thing at the time to be able to do to solidify your legacy and let people hundreds and hundreds of years from now know what you looked like and a little bit of an insight into who you were. Well, nowadays, we have all this technology to create an amazing legacy, and I'm of the view that it's all wasted because instead of taking photos of themselves, people are taking photos of their food. And instead of taking videos of themselves talking about things that are actually really important and should be shared, people are doing TikTok challenges. Now, there's nothing wrong with TikTok challenges. Do your worst. Like, if you want to do a dance challenge, or if you want to lip sync to another piece of content, great. Lots of fun. But I think that we all stand to inherit from our predecessors in various ways. We, as a society, have a very understandable system of inheriting money, because we all, most people know what a will is and they understand how it works, and it's a way of people protecting their financial legacy for the future generations and who stands to get it. We don't have anything like that yet for the person, the soul behind the person and the relationship and who they were, and yet we have all these ways of documenting it, and we choose not to. And so something to perhaps consider is that we all stand to inherit a digital legacy from everybody. There will be, after we pass, we will have a Facebook page, an Instagram page, a YouTube channel, a blog. There are all these things that will be left behind. And what that is a digital legacy. And if it's full of pictures of your food and you dancing and miming along to things, no one's going to really know who you were or what you stood for or what you enjoyed and the lives that you touched. And I think we need to implement a cultural shift to put that on people's radar and to let them know the value that has, because I think it's tremendous. So they are some of the many reasons, just a few really, of the many reasons why I think that it would be a fantastic idea for everybody to consider writing their life story or filming their life story or creating an audio recording. We're going to move on now to another section, which is about things that people have said to me when I've told them what I was doing with my dad, and they were like, "Oh, I could never do that." And I was sort of thinking, "Well, why? What would be stopping you?" And they've said things that are very legitimate answers to that question. But as we've explored them, we've kind of found ways that actually wouldn't be a problem. And so if anybody out there is thinking, "Oh yes, but I'd always worry about this, or I'd always worry about that," let's see if we can shine a bit of light on how you can avoid some of those pitfalls. So we're going to do this in a slightly more quick-fire fashion, and then I'll round off at the end. Here is a few things to consider before you write your life story. Privacy. Goes without saying that sometimes things that happen behind closed doors should be left behind closed doors. You might reach a point in your life where you feel comfortable about talking about certain things, but if any of the things that you're talking about involves somebody else, they might want to keep that private. So yeah, always consider the delicate nature of anything that you might be talking about that might be private, especially to somebody else, or that might impact them in some way. Judgment. I think everybody's got a little bit of a fear of judgment. I know I certainly do. And as a result, we try as best we can to navigate around topics of conversation and you know what we do in our day-to-day lives, so that we are not judged by people. And I think with a little bit of careful thought, you know, you can avoid talking about things that people might judge you for. Future-proofing that as well is quite important, because people are judged for things now that they would never have been judged for, 50 years ago. And so I think the key topics to perhaps not talk about, if you're making your life story, would be talking about your opinions on other people. I would avoid that, because how we're encouraged to talk about other people is always evolving and always changing, and people might look back on that unfavorably. And things like political ideologies, I don't think anyone's going to care what your political ideologies are. We've all got them, and sometimes we share them with the people closest to us. But if we remember again who we're making this for, they want to know about you. If politics has been a very, very specific part of your life, then you might like to touch on the subject. But I wouldn't use it as a vehicle for, let's say, ranting about certain political agendas. And I would keep that to yourself, because I don't think that will age well. Even if you think it will now, I encourage you again to think about, well, people said things 50 years ago, or not even 50 years ago, like 20 years ago, that people nowadays are outraged by. And you think, okay, well then I should be careful what I put down. So yeah, judgment is something to be cautious of. And I think, the key to that is keep it about yourself, and keep it about your memories, and keep it about the relationships that you've had, and the things that you've enjoyed, and levity is keeping it fun is a good way of navigating around that. Misinterpretation. This is a pretty straightforward one. I think I would encourage you to write and rewrite anything that you're going to put into your book or into your film, and practice saying it if you're putting it into a film, just so that people don't get the wrong idea about what you're saying. It would be a terrible shame if you phrased something in a way, especially something really important, in a way where people misinterpreted it and took it the wrong way, and it wasn't therefore as poignant or as emotional or as heartfelt. And I think that's just a case of practicing what you're going to say. Emotional impact. This is a big one, and I would say nobody is prepared for the emotional impact it's going to have on the people that watch this film or read this book. I was definitely not ready for it with my dad. I got very emotional. I definitely cried. And I think he shed a tear or two as well. Also, we shared it with his sister. And I think he shared it with his brother as well. And so quite a few people within the close family have seen it. And it's just a very emotional piece to watch. Now, I love that about it. It's important, though, to consider where boundaries might be crossed. And again, you know, I've spoken about people who might want to use it as a vehicle for offering particularly emotional content that might be distressing for certain people that it's made for, the audience that it's made for. So again, I think the way around this is to keep it to things that you know aren't going to upset people, and keep it light where it can be light. Obviously, there's more to life than that, and there are certain important things that people need to talk about that are a little bit darker in nature or a little bit more difficult to talk about, and we mustn't shy away from that. But do consider the emotional impact of your audience when you're talking, and yeah, just remember that this is forever for them. They will have this for the rest of their lives, and the chances are their kids and their grandkids and so on will have it for the rest of their lives. So yeah, it's heartfelt and emotional is great, but gut-wrenching might be a step too far. There you go. Loss of control. This is a big one, and it sort of touches a little bit on things that we've already said before. We live in a day and in an age where families can live all over the world, and therefore the nature of sharing something that's as important and as wonderful as this means putting it on the internet in some capacity or other, normally on a sharing platform. So let's take YouTube as an example. If your family created this film and they put it on YouTube, it would then potentially be viewable by a whole load of other people all over the world. You can adjust the settings on a YouTube video so that it's only viewable by people that have the link. Might talk about that in a little bit more detail later on. But yeah, so there are things that you can do to get around it, but I would be very, very mindful of the fact that as soon as it's online, as soon as it's not just a physical copy, as soon as it's online somewhere, it is potentially viewable by anyone. And the reason I think that's important is because you might be tempted to say things about people or events or like organizations that you think are never going to see this film, but actually they might, because they might have access to it in a way that you hadn't anticipated. And I think one of the best, I mean, the obvious way to avoid any conflict of interest there is just to not talk about those things or those people or those organizations. But of course, it might be a really important part of your journey and your life. And so I think another way to do it is to be extremely diplomatic and almost, you know how politicians have like ways of getting round questions and getting round topics and phrasing things in a way that, you know, people can't really come after them for it because they were careful about how they said it. So using choice language, you know, and being delicate about the way you phrase things. And also, you know, no one's going to come after you for like any kind of slanderous remarks if all you're really doing is a nudge and a wink. So if you're doing, you know, you get to the end of a story and you're like, if you know what I mean. Well, you haven't really said it, so no one can really accuse you of anything, but everyone was able to make up their own mind. And there have been a few occasions when I've encouraged people in front of camera to do exactly that, to go, that might be a little bit too specific. That might come back to bite you in the bum a little bit. So maybe let's do that again and just allude to the idea. Let the audience make up their own mind. We're going to say it in ways that, you know, they understand what we're saying, but we haven't officially said it. So yeah, that's a nice little way to get around that if there's something just a little bit delicate in nature. So that's a few things for you to consider before putting pen to paper, before hitting the record button on your camera or on your phone. Just to think about in order to manage the outcomes of what you're trying to create and make sure that it is as enjoyable, as neutral, and as beneficial as possible. So the last thing that we're going to talk about in this first episode is, where do we start? Now, it can be extraordinarily overwhelming, I think, to decide, right, I'm going to do this, I'm going to write my life story, where do I even begin? You're going to come down into your kitchen with your A4 bit of paper and your pen, and you're going to make a cup of tea, and you're going to have your bourbons all lined up in a row and whatnot, and then you're just going to look at this blank page and you're going to go, I don't even know where to start. And that can be quite crippling, actually, and it can go a stage further, and you can start to not want to go through the process because you feel like you're failing. And so I've come up with a list of things that I think that would be useful and it's project management stuff. And really it's about, having a mindset of taking bite-sized pieces out of the pie. In order to make sure that you feel like you're making progress and it's enjoyable, and ideally that you see it through to completion. So here's a little list of ways to start your process. Reflect. It might sound obvious, but I think that the first thing to do is just allow your mind to wander. See what you can remember. See what starts coming back to you. I would encourage you to do it in isolation, so that you've got that freedom of thought. You've not got somebody talking to you. You're really able to focus on it. Going for walks and having that kind of almost meditative state of thinking about things that have happened in your past. How much can you remember? And thereafter, I would encourage you to really explore that memory you just recalled, to get some of the finer detail and see where that leaves you. So, for example, something that I encouraged with my dad was, if you're thinking about school, for example, can you remember a specific teacher? Can you remember a specific lesson? Then just live in that moment for a second. Now can you start to think about who was sat next to you in class? Can you start to think about what you could see in that room? Where was the position of the classroom within the context of the school? And I think you'll be amazed at how much you can actually conjure by going through that process. Because if you hit a brick wall and you go, no, I can't remember that, that's fine. But you can go on to something else. And actually, you might find that some of that information comes back to you at a later date. But it's about trying to live again in those moments in your mind. We're all very visually driven, and so you might find it easiest to do this with your eyes closed. I certainly do. Whenever I'm trying to remember details of things from my history, closing my eyes always helps, because then I can start to visualize it. Smell is one of the most closely associated senses with regards to memory recollection. That's why you can smell something and then all of a sudden you're like, that reminds me of so-and-so, or this is just like when I went on holiday that time or whatever it might be. So yeah, I think that, just take some time to go sift through your memories and try to remember as much as possible, and just let that be your task for the day. You don't even have to write any of it down. Just live in those moments, and make sure that it's a happy process doing it as well, because that's going to give you the insight into what the rest of this project might look like. Gather materials. I can't stress enough that this is probably going to be one of the most enjoyable parts of your process. Like, you're going to go into your loft, you're going to get all those old pictures down, you're going to get all the little trinkets and all the little memorabilia and, so-and-so's first pair of shoes, things that you kept and you don't know why you kept them. This is your opportunity to get them out and enjoy it again. Because there's a reason that you've kept all those things. And it's happiness, it's... There's a reason that you've kept all those things, and it's happiness, it's nostalgia, and it's good to swim in that nostalgia every now and again. People don't want to live in the past, but to just have those memories periodically and remember fondly and share that process. I can't stress it enough. Share it with your family. One of my happiest moments on this whole project was going through the old photo albums with my dad, and him being able to say, that's so-and-so, and that's so-and-so, and this was taken here, and this was just before you were born. And it was just like, whoa, this whole lifetime. And it really cemented the process, why we were doing it. I learned so much from it that I never otherwise would have thought about. We actually did a whole section, which I'll talk about in another episode, with my dad, where I asked him to speak about his most treasured possessions, and he spoke about his family ring that his dad had worn, and now he was wearing it, and he was able to speak so articulately and so passionately, and he knew all the history of it. And I was thinking to myself, as I was filming it, I was thinking, this is a ring that I technically and probably stand to inherit. And I would have had none of the context around this. I would have known that it was my dad's ring, and it was his dad's ring before that, and that probably would have been it. But he was able to speak with such clarity and in such detail about the ring, and it was amazing to hear it, and I'll always have that now. So the context around this family ring will always be greater, having had him speak about it. And of course, not only that, I have a little boy now, which I didn't when we made his film. But if, for example, I chose to pass that on to my little boy or my little girl, then they would have not only my recollections of my, memories of the ring, but they'd have their grandpa's as well, which is really special. So yeah, the gathering the materials bit, it's gonna massively improve memory recollection. I promise you, all the things that are gonna come flooding back to you as soon as you see your yearbook, or as soon as you see, so and so's first dress from when they're in the dancing show the first year. It's all gonna come flooding back. Keep a pen and paper handy for that day. It's really important. Choose a starting point. Again, this might sound like an obvious one, but pick a point in time that you really want to spend time trying to live in that moment and remember as much as possible. I can't stress enough that I don't think you need to go through a chronological recounting of events. It might work for some people. I dare say it will, but I think for the vast majority of people, the best thing you can do is keep notes. My dad took a month I basically printed out a few sheets of A4 and I said, look, there's a load of questions on there. Answer as much or as little as you want, but it's there as a prompt for you to help with talking about the various things that you might want to talk about. And he took about a month with that document, just making notes, and not in book order or anything like that. It was much more like sporadic all over the page, and that allowed him some space to add things in as things came back to him. And it wasn't in like chronological order, and he could pick any subject or topic or time scale he wanted at any point in time. Anything that ever came back to him, he could make the notes. And I think by starting with something that he felt he could remember quite well, firstly, that encouraged him that it was something that he could do. Secondly, it encouraged him that he doesn't have to remember every single detail of every single memory of every single point in his life. And to have a few things that you remember really well is so much more important than trying to remember everything and giving up because you can't do it, or even remembering just a few details of everything. It's still nice, it's still lovely to have, but the hit of the whole fruit, to coin a phrase, is when you see somebody really passionately, confidently, articulately recounting events with detail and precision, because it's like they're there again. And I tell you what, I'm gonna show you some of this footage in future episodes. But when you see my dad talk about school, you know, there are times when he's being his old playful self again, and you can just see what he would have been like as a kid at school. And it's so magical. It's lovely. So yeah, don't be afraid to pick a point in time, and it doesn't have to be very early on. And work outwards from there, and just you know, fill in the gaps as you go. Set goals. This really is more to do with project management than anything. I think it can be overwhelming, and you can feel like you're stagnating and not making progress if you don't set goals. It sounds a bit work lingo, but I'm sure you know what I mean. And if you're anything like me, set small goals, set achievable goals. You know, it's things that you can easily tick off, so it looks like you've done more than you perhaps have. But yeah, I think that the more you can feel like you're making progress, the more likely you are to keep going and feel that sense of completion at the end of it. So yeah, set goals and enjoy ticking them off. Celebrate progress. Really just an extension of the previous point. You know, if you have little things that you want to achieve by the end of the week or the end of the day or whatever, if you do it, give yourself a pat on the back. Treat yourself to a glass of wine. You know, make yourself feel good, and know that it is a process. It's a very big project, and you can only do it one bit at a time. And yeah, I think that it will feel all the better when you get to the end of you feel like you're getting to the end of the project, and you're like, this is really going to happen. I'm really going to do this. And that's, you know, it's like when you're running a marathon. Not that I've ever run a marathon. But I imagine that it's that it's what it's like when you get to like mile 23 and you're like, I'm going to do this. I'm actually going to get to the end of this race. So yeah, celebrate the victories, and I guarantee it will encourage you to keep going. Find your voice. So this is the last point on this section, and really this is just about authenticity. Whether it's your writing style, whether it's your speech delivery, or whether it's putting yourself in front of a camera, which takes time, by the way. There's a difference between recording the audio separate for like just an audio file so people can listen to it back like a podcast. That's one thing. Putting somebody in front of a camera and asking them to be authentic is quite tricky, and it takes time, and don't underestimate that process. Don't get in front of a camera, spend the first 2 minutes feeling awkward and anxious and think you've failed and you shouldn't keep going. It takes time. It really does. Even, you know, a good metric for that in the modern era is like YouTube, you know, influencers, people like that. And all the people that are great at it now, watch their first videos. Go back onto their YouTube thing, go to their video portfolio and click order, change the order so that it's earliest first, and click on their first video that they've got uploaded. And I guarantee you they're all awful, because you learn as you go. And it's quite quick, the process at getting good at it. So first of all, persevere with that. But second of all, whether you're writing or whether you're speaking, where the authenticity comes is speak the way you would speak. I keep saying in your own words, but speak the way that you would speak. Because firstly, if you've got kids, for example, that's how they're used to you speaking. They don't want you to come on the screen like a news reporter and be quite static and quite robotic. Like, when I was at school, no one wants you to speak like that, because that's just, it's not authentic. If you have colloquialisms in the way that you naturally speak, use them. If you've got an accent, let me hear your accent. Don't try and put on a posh voice. Sit comfortably as well. and the same is true for all of these things. Well, for majority of these things with writing as well. Write the way that you would speak, because that's the way they'll hear it. And that's lovely that they can hear what you're writing as you're writing it. So that brings us to the end of this episode. I hope you found it informative and interesting, and I hope we've shed some light on a few questions that you may have had coming into this video. It has been a bit more of an overview with the introduction, rather than the future episodes, which are going into a little bit more detail and give a little bit more specifics. I hope that you'll watch those too, and I hope that you'll get something out of those as well. But all that's left for me to say is I wish you lots of luck on this journey. It is a wonderful journey. It's extraordinarily cathartic and emotional, and well worth it. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.